Yeah, good morning, everybody. Actually, I'm still part of University of New South Wales. I taught here in 1992 for a year, so the trip back was very nostalgic to me. As a member of UNSW, I didn't want to express my thanks to you guys of my university. We regard it as a family. But I do want to thank our Vietnamese and the Japanese friends for inviting me to this very important event. Let's get back to the main topic of mine. I was requested to do the topic on, let me say, conflict resolution, which I do not agree. There is no way the conflict can be resolved. In the words of Bob Carr, the South China Sea conflicts may never be resolved. Now, in one of the conferences we had on South China Sea theme, Kevin Rudd was asked this question: what do you see about conflict resolution? Now, he just answered, "Are you kidding me? The resolution can be achieved only through two means. First, mutual concession, which is impossible. Second, forced occupation or resolution through war. That would be too expensive." So buying these two options, it is very, very easy for us to come to this conclusion that once we recognize the impossibility of resolving the conflict, what would be the next? The next is, of course, we call the conflict prevention and management. Conflicts cannot be avoided, but it can be managed. If mutual efforts can be made towards this end, I think then what is the concrete indicator of this kind of conflict management? I just borrowed the words from a Filipino lady who were invited to a South China Sea conference on the very day the arbitration was petered out, the 12th of July. Now, she was from Asia and Pacific Security Center in Honolulu, and I was also part of that conference myself. She said the biggest common denominator is to maintain the status quo. Status quo is a concrete means of crisis prevention. It's not a good solution anyway. It's not a good means, but it may be, just like Churchill said, democracy is a bad system, but it's still the best system we have seen in the human history. So this is not an ideal solution, but this is possibly currently the current way out, especially in terms of war avoidance. I have to say I have written a longest paper for this conference. I don't know why, but it was not included in the proceedings. But if you have time, you can read it, especially on the second aspects. I want to talk about the so-called decombatization of the South China disputes, mainly in terms of demilitarization of the conflicts. I may not have time to go for the second part today, so I just concentrate on the first part, on the interaction between China and the ASEAN countries after the ruling was petered out. The first one is conflict mitigation is very important, and the central theme of my argument is stabilization of the dispute. That is a crucial task facing all of us sitting here. We do have happy news. Not everything is bad in South China Sea dispute. For example, no party involved takes irredentism as a means for conflict resolution, and no party is committed to use of force in gaining the upper hand against other disputants, and no party has exclusively tied the South China Sea dispute to their overall bilateral relationship or multilateral relationship, for example, between China and the ASEAN countries. Now, yesterday, Dr. Kruger discussed the so-called American ad hocism. Why? That was simple. Now, today, and so many South China Sea conferences, I have attended since 1992. Many of the workshops in Australia, for example, organized by Sam Baseman and Commodore Jack, we discussed this kind of thing long time ago. Then we discovered one fact, that even if when we concentrate South China Sea dispute in this room, in this occasion, the policymakers in Canberra, Washington, D.C., and elsewhere, they think of the conflict in the context of the overall relationship between, for example, China and the United States. In this particular case with the United States, now it is a choice in between three levels of strategic calculus. Number one, the overall bilateral relationship, which is so crucial to the United States and China, as mentioned by Obama and other important political leaders in DC, that the South China Sea issue cannot hijack the overall bilateral relationship as a whole, because America needs China's support, for example, over the issue of the 6th nuclear test in North Korea, climate change, and all other important political issues. So by the end of the day, they have to reach a balancing point where to put the South China Sea dispute in the bilateral relationship. But by the end of the day, we have found that the political leaders, differing the leaders in Pentagon, that they place a bilateral relationship probably above the overall relationship, above the dispute in the South China Sea in the bilateral interaction. So this is very, very important because if we do not look at the broader context where the South China Sea dispute is placed, we concentrate on one aspect of the dispute, then we tend to come to this conclusion, oh, this is the end of the world. Actually, it is not. We have ample room and measures to manage this conflict through this kind of broader consideration of the strategic considerations beyond the South China Sea dispute. So I just pick up a few examples here. First on Vietnam. Sino-Vietnamese relationships are pretty stable currently, even if they have very substantial dispute between them in the South China Sea. The leaders of the two countries also place party-to-party relationship, state-to-state relationship above the South China Sea dispute. So that was a conclusion reached by just published diplomatic blue work last week. So it pointed out that the South China Sea dispute was a major obstacles in the bilateral relationship, but it had to be managed and contained. That is a feeling that the Chinese leaders and the Chinese people share as well. So that creates these ample rooms for going ahead without confronting each other because of South China Sea dispute. So only the last week we see Prime Minister of Vietnam and one Politburo member of Vietnamese government visited Beijing, and one Politburo member of the Chinese Communist Party visited Vietnam. They reached a number of bilateral agreements that in a way, it mitigates the worsening aspects of the dispute after the ruling. On Philippine-China relationship, I think Sarah mentioned the remarks by the president. I think that was quite positively received in Beijing, and China responded meaningfully and in accordance. For example, I think it was a deal between China and ASEAN that Huangyan Island will not be reclaimed. No facilities will build in the Huangyan Island at all. So that was not a new decision. As far as I remembered, right after 2012, the PRA raised this issue to reclaim Huangyan Island, and the political leadership rejected. Under Hu Jintao said it was too costly. And Xi Jinping, it said, oh, it would, unify the ASEAN responses to China's South China Sea behavior. More recently, it would be linked to the frequency of US 12 nautical miles entry into the Chinese-held islands in the South China Sea. So America and China has the acquiescence that the Huangyan Island will not be reclaimed. On the China side, on the US side, Americans will exercise restraints on the so-called matter of 12 nautical miles entry. But most importantly, China has already reclaimed 6 islands there with those facilities built. So there is no particular need for further reclamation in the Huangyan Island in the first place. And late next month, when President sorry, I couldn't pronounce his name. When he visited Beijing, I think the bilateral agreement would be reached that the Filipino fishermen will be allowed back to the Huangyan area. So this would be a sign of further improvement in the bilateral relationship. With all this done, the stability in the South China Sea could be reached to a minimum level, not satisfactory to all, not satisfactory but acceptable to all. So by the end of the day, we do see we call it a point of equilibrium reached. So nobody agreed to most of the important issues, but they have to find ways to live together in this very complicated world. So that's basically what I want to say on the first point. My second point, very, very briefly. How many? Okay. I invented the word combatization vis-a-vis the word militarization. I don't agree with the meaning of militarization because it is more politically used than by the meaning of the word militarization per se in terms of defense and military analysis. Now here, I invented this word combatization to mean that the militarization has been lifted to a level that the combat gear has been so high that the involving parties could engage each other in the ready combat operations. We are approaching towards this end, not between China and ASEAN claimants, but between the United States and China. I think that is Admiral Harris' word that we could fight tonight. And the top soldier in the PRA paid a very unprecedented visit to the Southern War Theater and called the Chinese forces to be combat ready for any actions in the South China Sea. That was quite unprecedented as far as I watched the PRA development for more than 4 decades. So here, there are some concrete issues to remove the trigger for the immediate and or possible military confrontation, not diplomatic or other type of confrontation. So here, I just list a few points. Number one, the 12 nautical mile entry creates a physical contact between the two militaries. Now, if we know from the history of Soviet and NATO countries that increased likelihood of confrontation and things like that, as far as the Chinese are concerned, yeah, it is important the frequency of the entry has to be properly set by most important by the White House, not the DOD. DOD want more, I know, but so far it is not that frequent. Frequency matters. It matters also because of the Chinese domestic politics, and that would leave the top leaders very little room to compromise in a way. Currently, the Chinese government has not dramatized this kind of entry. But if the entry becomes frequent or routine, that will be another different matter. So what the right balancing point here, which we call the symbolic but seemingly routine patrols. I think 2 entries is acceptable. However, currently 3 almost in a year, it is even better. Second, no additional offensive weapon systems to be deployed in the reclaimed islands. The PRA has no plan to deploy combat aircraft in those reclaimed islands at all. And the airstrips cannot sustain heavy combat aircraft landing and taking off on a frequent basis. Most importantly, there's no point of deploying these combat aircraft in those areas in the first place. Finally, rules of engagement. We call the Naval and Air Force encounter agreements that China has has signed 6 of them, even if it's technical, but it creates some rules of engagement, especially for the frontline soldiers to behave not too aggressively. Okay, thank you very much.